being the son, in my case, son of Holocaust survivors was, can I use the term without evoking self-pity? It was kind of lonely. You never miss what you never had. But I never had any relatives. I never had an aunt, an uncle, a grandma, a grandpa. I never had any of that, which I think that's part of the reason I wasn't bar mitzvahed, because a bar mitzvah is where you invite relatives, and there was no relatives to invite. So my eldest brother had a celebration, but not the actual going to the synagogue and so forth. My middle brother, myself, we didn't even have the celebration. We had nothing, you know. It was hard because that was sort of like the equivalent among WASPs of a coming out party, where the bar mitzvahs were basically to flaunt wealth. You made it, you know. You judged the bar mitzvah back then. Where was it? A fancy room or a basement type room? How many couples were invited? Did you have matchboxes with initials on them? All these silly things. But I didn't have any of that. And I would say I was kind of popular. You know, at that age, I was good looking. No point in being self-effacing. I was good looking, and I was gregarious. And so it was humiliating not to have the bar mitzvah, because it was such a critical. It wasn't like you became a man. It was a social status. And so I was very low on the pecking order, because I didn't have the social pecking order, because I didn't have the bar mitzvah. And in the end, it straightened me as a person. It made me much more immune to my public reputation. I got tough. And the other aspect of it was, because of my parents' experience during the war, their politics were very unusual. First of all, you could never, to the last day in my home, you could never say a word critical of Stalin. Impossible. Because my parents looked at the world through their experience during World War II. It was the Russian Red Army that defeated the Nazis, and that's all they cared about. Which, again, like my mother's disdain of religion, my father was as emphatic. You know what he would say? By a coincidence, my father was in Auschwitz, and then on the Auschwitz Death March with a guy named Israel Gutman. And they were both in the Zionist youth movement called Hashomer Hatzair. In 1948, Gutman, who was my father's closest friend, he heads off for Israel. I should say Hashomer Hatzair was very left-wing, pro-Soviet. My father and my mother, they head to the United States. And Israel Gutman eventually became one of the directors of Yad Vashem, the Israeli Holocaust Museum. And later in life, Gutman adapted his political beliefs and became very anti-Soviet. And my father, who liked him a lot, you know, they went through the war together. They went through the Death March together. They were in the DP camp together. They were in Hashomer Hatzair together. And my father would just shake his head and say, when he became very anti-Russian, another traitor. Another traitor. It was one of the things I deeply respected about my parents. They liked money. They liked money. And there was a lot of money to be made by being a Holocaust survivor in the 70s and 80s. Because my parents were the real deal. You know, most of the people who say the Holocaust survivor is just complete nonsense, it's complete fabrication. But my parents, and everybody knew they were the real deal. They were very indignant when anyone else pretended to be. And so, you know, my mother was ruthless. What do you mean you were in the Holocaust? You have no idea what we went through. They were real. It wasn't a confection. It wasn't a concoction. It wasn't an exaggeration. So there was a lot of money to be made. But in that era, the Holocaust was being weaponized. These are things you just couldn't possibly know because it's a totally different era. There was this large numbers of Jews who were in the Soviet Union. And then this campaign began to free Soviet Jewry. And it was claimed that the Russians were persecuting the Jews in Russia the same way as the Nazis were persecuted the Jews. And so the Holocaust was weaponized against the Soviet Union. And so if you wanted to make the money, you had to talk about how horrible the Russians are. You had to denounce the Russians. And you had to talk about freeing Soviet Jewry. My parents, there was no way. Give them, I mean this, and they like money. You give them $10 million, and they wouldn't say a word against the Russians. They were loyal. I don't agree with a lot of what they said. I told you I didn't agree with their hatred of the Germans. I want to just qualify that. I want the full picture. I did have a good friend who was half German. He was half Armenian, half German. His name is Cyrus Wieser. He's now a successful professor. He may have retired already, I don't know. And I once brought him over to the house. And afterwards, my mother, at the end when he was leaving, my mother whispered in his ear, "I know you're half German, it's okay." Which for her, well, yes. My father could not say that.